The universe had a way of humbling the arrogant, though most species learned this lesson too late. In the grand spiral of the Milky Way, where 1,000 civilizations rose and fell like breathing, humanity remained the youngest voice in a chorus that had sung for millions of years. They were the children at the adult table, tolerated but rarely heard. Their warnings dismissed as the paranoia of an inexperienced species, still learning to walk among the stars. Ambassador Natasha Volkov had spent 15 years of her life trying to make them listen. She stood now in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, staring at the shimmering construct of the Galactic Assembly Station. It hung in space like a jewel carved from crystallized starlight, home to the most powerful governing body in known space. Beautiful and cold, just like the hearts of those who ruled within it. Behind her reflection in the viewport, she saw the face of someone who had aged beyond her 42 years. The job had carved lines into her features that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible battles fought with nothing but words. Her auburn hair, now streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in the severe style required by diplomatic protocol. She wore the formal deep blue uniform of Earth's stellar diplomatic corps. Every medal and ribbon earned through patience that would have broken lesser souls. Her aide, a young officer named Thomas Reeves, approached with a datapad clutched in trembling hands. He was barely 25, fresh from the academy, still believing that truth and justice mattered in the cosmic arena. Natasha had been like him once. She envied and pitied him in equal measure. Ambassador, the latest reports from the Kashari sector have been confirmed, Thomas said, his voice tight with barely contained rage. The Vren Collective hit another colony. New Terra. Population 8,000. They're calling it a navigation error again. Natasha closed her eyes and felt the weight of 8,000 lives pressing against her chest. New Terra had been a terraforming project. Families who had volunteered to spend decades turning a barren rock into something green and alive. They had been poets and farmers, engineers and teachers, people who believed in building rather than destroying. How many survivors? She asked, though part of her did not want to know. 43. Most of them were off-world when it happened. 43 people who would carry the ghosts of their loved ones for the rest of their lives. 43 voices crying out for justice that would never come. Natasha had heard those cries before. She carried hundreds of them in her memory. Thousands of names of the dead that the galaxy had decided did not matter enough. The Vren are accelerating their expansion, Thomas continued, pulling up star charts on his datapad. In the past 18 months, they have attacked or annexed 23 territories. 14 of those were human colonies. The others belong to species without significant military power. Ambassador, this is not random. This is systematic. Natasha turned from the viewport to study the data. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. The Vren were testing boundaries, pushing to see how far they could go before someone pushed back. They targeted the weak and the isolated, always with plausible excuses. Navigation errors, communication breakdowns, rogue commanders acting without authorization. The excuses changed, but the result was always the same. Expansion through violence dressed up as accident. The assembly session begins in 3 hours, Natasha said, her voice carrying the steel that had made her one of Earth's most effective diplomats. I will present this evidence. I will demand intervention. And they will vote it down, just like they have voted down every other appeal for the past 5 years. Thomas looked stricken. Then why keep trying? If you know they will not listen, why waste your breath? Natasha smiled, and it was a sad, weary expression. Because someday, when the Vren grow bold enough to target species the Assembly actually cares about, they will need to know that someone warned them. They will need to remember that humanity stood up and told the truth while everyone else looked away. We create the record, Thomas. We bear witness. That is all we can do. The assembly chamber was designed to inspire awe, and it succeeded magnificently. Arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking platform, representatives from 317 species sat in seats designed for their unique physiologies. The chamber stretched upward into a dome that displayed real-time images of the galaxy itself. Stars slowly turning overhead, like the eye of some cosmic god watching the proceedings below. Natasha walked to the central platform, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, though many of those eyes were not remotely human in shape or number. Some species had 4 eyes, others had compound organs that saw in spectrums humanity could barely imagine. All of them watched as the human ambassador prepared to speak words they had already. Decided to ignore Dot, she activated the holographic projector built into the platform. Images sprang to life around her, 3-dimensional and horrifyingly detailed. Burning cities, scorched earth, bodies that had been people hours before. The visual record of New Terra's destruction, captured by automated satellites that had survived the attack. Honored assembly, Natasha began, and her voice carried through the chamber's perfect acoustics without need for amplification. I come before you again to speak of genocide masquerading as misfortune. The Vren Collective has now attacked 23 worlds in 18 months. They claim accidents. They offer compensation. They promise investigations that never reveal wrongdoing. Meanwhile, thousands die, and the galaxy watches in silence. A ripple of movement went through the assembly. Some representatives leaned forward with interest. Others made the gestures of their species that indicated dismissal or boredom. The Vren ambassador, a creature named Thorvik, whose body resembled a mass of crystalline structures bound together by fields of energy, pulsed with colors that Natasha's translator rendered as amused contempt. She continued, her voice growing stronger as she channeled the anger of the dead into words that might reach the living. New Terra was a farming colony. No weapons. No strategic value. Just families growing food and building homes. The Vren destroyer that killed them did not malfunction. It followed a deliberate attack pattern. It targeted population centers. It ignored evacuation signals. This was murder, and we have the proof. The holographic display shifted to show tactical data, flight paths, weapon signatures, all the evidence that Thomas and dozens of other analysts had compiled. It was damning and irrefutable, which meant the assembly would find a way to refute it anyway. The pattern is clear, Natasha said, and now her voice carried an edge like sharpened steel. The Vren expand through violence. They test your resolve with each attack. They target the weak because they believe the strong will not care. They are correct. You have proven them correct with every vote to take no action, with every decision to accept their excuses, with every moment you choose comfort over justice. Thorvik rose from his seat, light cascading through his crystalline body in patterns that hurt human eyes to perceive. When he spoke, his voice resonated like crystal singing. The human ambassador speaks with passion, but without wisdom. Our investigation showed clear evidence of system malfunction. We have compensated the victims. The matter is resolved. Perhaps if humanity spent less time making accusations and more time maintaining proper defensive capabilities, such tragedies could be prevented. The words hit like a physical blow. Blame the victim. Suggest that being weak was itself a crime. Natasha had heard this argument before from bullies across the galaxy. Might made right, and those who could not defend themselves deserved whatever happened to them.
The assembly chairman, a being called Overseer Quilmesh from the ancient Selthari species, raised one of his 6 arms for silence. The Selthari had been spacefaring when humans still lived in caves, and they carried that age like a crown. Quilmesh had presided over the assembly for 70 years, which was barely middle age for his kind. His face was a smooth expanse of pale blue skin marked with bioluminescent patterns that indicated his mood and thoughts to those who could read them. "Ambassador Volkov," Quilmesh said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority. "Your grief is understood. However, this assembly operates on evidence and established procedures, not emotional appeals. The Vren Collective has provided detailed analysis of the system failures that led to the unfortunate incident at New Terra. They have paid reparations according to standard protocols. This body must ask what more you expect." Natasha felt something crack inside her chest. She had prepared for this moment, had known it was coming, but the reality still hit like falling into vacuum. They were going to do it again. They were going to choose convenience over conscience. "I expect justice," she said quietly, and the chamber's acoustics carried her words to every corner. "I expect the mighty to protect the weak, as your charter promises. I expect that when evidence of deliberate murder is presented, this body will investigate rather than accept the word of the accused. I expect that 300 species, working together, might value life more than political convenience." A murmur went through the assembly. Some species made sounds of approval, others of disapproval. Most stayed silent, waiting to see which way the power would flow before committing themselves. "But expectations and reality often part ways," Natasha continued. "So let me speak plainly. The Vren are testing you. Each attack they commit without consequence emboldens them. Today they target human colonies because we lack the military strength to retaliate. Tomorrow they will target others. Eventually they will come for species represented in this chamber, species with votes and allies and power. When that day comes, what precedent will you have set? That genocide is acceptable if you file the right paperwork afterward?" Thorvik's crystalline body flashed with angry colors. "The human makes threats and predictions based on fear rather than fact. The Vren Collective seeks only to expand into unclaimed territories for the benefit of all species. If humans choose to place colonies in contested regions, they must accept the risks." "New Terra was not contested," Natasha shot back. "It was registered with this assembly 40 years ago. Your own records show Vren approval of the colony charter. You knew exactly where those people were, and you killed them anyway." "Alleged," Quilmesh interrupted, his bioluminescent patterns showing discomfort. "The attack is alleged to be deliberate. The evidence is circumstantial. Without absolute proof of intent, this body cannot move against a member species of the Assembly. To do so would violate the principles of due process that bind us together." Natasha looked up at the dome above, at the stars turning in their eternal dance. Somewhere out there, 43 people grieved for thousands of lost loved ones. Somewhere out there, the next target was going about their daily life, unaware that death was calculating the most efficient approach vector. Somewhere out there, humanity's colonies held their breath and wondered if they would be next. "Then I invoke Article 47 of the Assembly Charter," Natasha said, her voice ringing clear and hard. "The article of last resort. When a member species believes their survival is threatened by the actions of another member species, they may demand a full tribunal investigation with enforcement powers. This is not a request. This is a formal invocation of our rights under the charter you all agreed to honor." Silence fell like a hammer. Article 47 had not been invoked in over 2 centuries. It was the nuclear option of assembly politics, forcing a comprehensive investigation that could result in military intervention, economic sanctions, or even expulsion from the assembly itself. It also required a 2/3 vote of the entire body to approve. Quilmesh's bioluminescent patterns showed something that might have been shock or might have been respect. "Ambassador Volkov, you understand what you are asking? An Article 47 investigation would strain our resources and create divisions that could take decades to heal. Is humanity truly prepared to bear the political consequences of such an action? We are prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect our people." Natasha replied. "That is what any species would do. That is what you would do if it were your children burning in those colonies. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or eye equivalents of as many representatives as she could. I am asking you to remember why this assembly exists. We came together because alone, we were vulnerable to the darkness between the stars. Together, we promised to be better than the violence that defined so much of our separate histories. Together, we swore to protect each other. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the acoustics ensured every being in the chamber heard. I am asking you to keep that promise. Not for humanity's sake, though we desperately need your help. For your own sake. For the sake of every species that will come after us. Show the galaxy that the assembly means something more than words and ceremonies. Show them that justice exists here. Thorvik laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Justice? You speak of justice while your own species has barely left your cradle world? Humanity has been in space for less than a century. You understand nothing of the complexities of maintaining peace across a galaxy. The Vren have been members of this assembly for over 10,000 years. Our record speaks for itself. Yes, it does, said a new voice. Every head or head equivalent turned toward the speaker. Natasha's heart leaped. The representative from the Corvash alliance had risen, a serpentine being named Seseth whose species rarely involved themselves in assembly politics. The Corvash were old, almost as old as the Selthari, and they commanded respect through sheer accumulated wisdom. Seseth's scales gleamed like polished metal as she uncoiled from her seat. The Vren record shows 17 conflicts in the past 5 centuries, always against species with limited military capacity. The Vren record shows expansion rates that far exceed their stated population growth. The Vren record shows a pattern that Ambassador Volkov has correctly identified as systematic aggression disguised as accident. Thorvik's crystalline structure flashed with alarm. The Corvash would side with humans over a fellow ancient species? This is unprecedented. What is unprecedented, Seseth replied, her voice carrying a sibilant edge, is the Vren testing this body's integrity so blatantly. I support the Article 47 invocation. Let there be a full investigation. Let the evidence be examined by neutral parties. If the Vren are innocent as they claim, they should welcome the opportunity to prove it conclusively. Natasha felt a surge of hope so intense it was almost painful. One of the old powers had broken ranks. If others followed, if the political calculation shifted even slightly, there might be a chance. Other representatives began to stir. Arguments broke out in pockets of the chamber. Some species stood in support of the investigation. Others stood in opposition. The careful political balance that had allowed the Vren to act with impunity was beginning to crack. The vote took 3 hours. 3 hours of debate, political maneuvering, threats and promises exchanged in whispered conversations between allied species. Natasha stood at the central platform through all of it, refusing to leave, refusing to show weakness. Thomas brought her water and glucose tablets, the minimum necessary to keep her standing. She watched the alignments shift and reform like galaxies colliding. Species that had been neutral for centuries suddenly had opinions. Ancient rivalries and alliances played out in real time as each representative calculated the cost of their vote. Some genuinely cared about justice. More cared about power and how this decision would affect their position in the cosmic hierarchy. The Vren worked furiously to gather support, calling in favors and making new promises. Thorvik's crystalline body pulsed with frantic light patterns as he moved from delegation to delegation. The Vren had built their expansion on the Assembly's willingness to look away. If that changed, everything they had gained could crumble. Finally, Quilmesh called for order. His bioluminescent patterns showed resignation as he prepared to tally the vote. All representatives will now cast their decision on the Article 47 invocation. Remember that you vote not just for today but for the precedent that will guide this body for generations to come. Choose wisely. The voting system was instantaneous, each representative's decision recorded and displayed simultaneously. The holographic tally appeared above the central platform, numbers climbing in real time. Natasha watched the count with her heart hammering against her ribs. 212 votes needed for the two-thirds majority. The numbers climbed. 100. 150. 180. The pace slowed as the last votes came in. 198. 200. 206. 209. The count stopped. Natasha stared at the final tally, and something inside her that had been holding on with desperate strength finally broke. 209 votes in favor. 108 against. They had failed. They were 3 votes short of the required majority. The chamber erupted in a mixture of relief and outrage. Some representatives stood and left immediately, wanting no part of what would come next. Others stayed to watch the human ambassador's reaction, curious to see how the young species would handle this defeat. Natasha stood perfectly still. She did not cry. She did not rage. She simply stared at the numbers that represented the Assembly's decision to sacrifice human lives for political stability. Quilmesh looked down at her with what might have been sympathy. The matter is decided. The Article 47 invocation is denied. However, the Assembly does recognize humanity's concerns. We will recommend a standard review of Vren expansion protocols to be conducted over the next 5 years. 5 years. They were offering to study the problem over 5 years while the Vren continued to kill with impunity. It was an insult dressed as a compromise, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Natasha found her voice, and when she spoke, it was with a calm that was more terrifying than any anger could have been. Then let this moment be recorded. Let every species in this chamber remember that when genocide came knocking, the Galactic Assembly voted to look away. Let them remember that when humans asked for help, you offered reviews and studies while our people burned. She paused, and in that pause, something fundamental shifted in her expression. The desperate diplomat faded, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Humanity came to the stars with hope, Natasha continued. We believed in cooperation and unity. We trusted that older, wiser species would guide us toward a better future. Today you have taught us a valuable lesson. There is no justice among the stars. There is only power, and those who lack it exist at the mercy of those who do not. Thorvik's crystalline structure pulsed with triumphant light. Perhaps now the humans will learn their place. The galaxy is not kind to those who cannot defend themselves. Natasha smiled, and it was a smile that made several nearby representatives lean back in their seats. Yes, we will learn our place. And you will learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small device that made Quilmesh's patterns flash with alarm. What you see is a quantum-encrypted transmitter. It is now sending a single message to Earth. One word that will change everything. That word is no. No more diplomacy, Natasha said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. No more patience. No more trust. We asked for help. You denied it. We asked for justice. You voted it down. We asked you to remember your promises. You chose convenience instead. So now humanity will remember something else. We will remember that the only species we can rely on is ourselves. She looked at Thorvik directly, and her smile widened. You called us weak. You said we lack the strength to defend ourselves. You were right. Past tense. Because while we have been talking and pleading and trying to work within your systems, Earth has been preparing. We learned from you, Thorvik. We learned that in this galaxy, only the strong survive. So we became strong in ways you cannot imagine. The transmitter in her hand began to glow. Throughout the chamber, security systems started screaming alerts. Ships approaching. Hundreds of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Not Vren ships. Human ships. The holographic display above the platform flickered and changed, showing external sensors. The assembled representatives watched in shocked silence as the largest military fleet in human history materialized around the assembly station. Carriers and destroyers, cruisers and frigates, all bearing the blue and white colors of Earth's united fleet. They hung in space like a metal constellation, weapons cold but presence undeniable. For 15 years I have stood here and begged for your protection, Natasha said. During those 15 years, humanity has been building. Not colony ships. Not trading vessels. Warships. Thousands of them. Because we always knew, that someday we would have to stand alone. Quilmesh's patterns showed something humans had never seen before in a Selthery, pure fear. This is an act of war. You bring weapons to the assembly station. This violates every treaty, every agreement. No, Natasha corrected. We bring weapons near the assembly station. All ships are outside the exclusion zone as defined by your own regulations. We are breaking no laws. We are simply reminding you that humanity is done asking for permission to survive. She looked around the chamber one last time. To the Vren Collective, consider this your only warning. Every human colony now has defensive platforms armed with weapons you did not know we possessed. Every human ship is now authorized to respond to threats with lethal force. You wanted to test our resolve. The test is over. Touch another human world, and we will show you what a young species can do when you back them into a corner. And to the assembly, Natasha continued, her voice dropping to something cold and final. Humanity withdraws from active participation in this body. We will maintain our embassy and our vote, but we will no longer seek your guidance or trust your promises. We will defend ourselves. We will forge our own alliances. And if that means we must become the very thing you feared, the aggressive young species that disrupts your comfortable order, then so be it. You created this outcome when you voted to let us die. Thomas appeared beside her, his young face transformed by the same hard determination that radiated from the ambassador. Together they walked toward the exit, leaving behind a chamber full of species that suddenly realized they had made a catastrophic mistake. They had pushed humanity to the edge, assuming humans would break. Instead, humanity had simply stopped trying to fit into a system that valued them as disposable. As Natasha reached the exit, Seseth called out. Ambassador Volkov. What happens now? Natasha paused and looked back. When she answered, her voice carried not anger but something far more dangerous, certainty. Now we remind the galaxy why Earth's evolution was built on survival of the fittest. We remind them that humans did not crawl to the top of our food chain by being gentle. We remind them that every predator species in our history learned one lesson. Never corner prey that has teeth. The Horizon's Edge departed the assembly station with an escort of 20 human destroyers, a statement of power that would have been unthinkable a day earlier. Natasha stood again in the observation deck, but this time she was not alone. Thomas stood beside her, and behind them, 30 members of Earth's military command watched through quantum communication channels, their holographic presences filling the room. Fleet Admiral David Okonkwo, a man whose decorated chest told the story of 4 decades preparing for this exact moment, spoke first. Ambassador Volkov, your transmission was received 18 hours ago. Everything we built, everything we prepared in secret, is now visible to the entire galaxy. There is no going back from this. I know, Natasha replied. We crossed the line. Now we see what lies on the other side. Chaos, said General Hannah Park, Earth's Strategic Defense Coordinator. Every species with ambitions of expansion just watched humanity pull a fleet out of nowhere. They are recalculating. Some will see opportunity. Some will see threat. All will see change. Good, Natasha said simply. Let them recalculate. Let them see that humanity is no longer a safe target. Let them understand that the rules have changed. Thomas pulled up the latest intelligence reports. The Vren are mobilizing their fleets. 3 battle groups are moving toward human space. They are not backing down. We knew they would not, Okonkwo said. The Vren built their empire on intimidation. If they retreat now, every species they have bullied will see weakness. They have no choice but to respond. Then we will show them why that response is a mistake, Natasha said quietly. Over the next 6 days, the galaxy held its breath and watched as 2 species moved toward confrontation. Diplomatic channels burned with messages. Some species offered support to humanity. More stayed neutral, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious. The assembly called emergency sessions that accomplished nothing except highlighting their own impotence. The Vren reached the first human colony on the 7th day. It was a mining outpost called Sterling Deep, population 400, tucked in an asteroid belt rich with rare metals. Before the assembly vote, it would have been an easy target. After the vote, it became a symbol. The Vren commander, a being called Krithos, sent a standard ultimatum. Evacuate within 6 hours or be considered hostile combatants. It was the same threat they had issued to New Terra and 17 other colonies. It had always worked before. This time, the human response came not from Sterling Deep but from the naval group that had been shadowing the Vren fleet since it entered human space. Captain Jennifer Zhou, commanding the cruiser Indomitable, transmitted a message that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. Vren Commander Krithos. You are in violation of the sovereign space of the Terran Coalition. Your ultimatum is rejected. You have 1 hour to reverse course and depart human territory. Any aggressive action will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. This is your only warning. Krithos, like every Vren before him, interpreted the warning as weakness. Humans had never fought back before. They had no real combat experience. They were bluffing with their shiny new ships that probably barely functioned. He ordered the attack. What happened next lasted 47 minutes and changed galactic politics forever. The human fleet did not wait for the Vren to fire first. The moment hostile targeting systems locked onto Sterling Deep, every human ship opened fire simultaneously with weapons the galaxy had never seen before. Railguns accelerated projectiles to ridiculous percentages of light speed. Laser batteries designed with Earth's unique understanding of quantum mechanics cut through Vren shields like they were made of tissue. Missile systems utilizing AI targeting that exceeded anything the assembly races possessed turned Vren point defense into a joke. And at the center of it all, the Indomitable unveiled humanity's most terrifying innovation, a directed plasma weapon that could turn a Vren cruiser into an expanding cloud of superheated particles in under 3 seconds. The Vren fleet died. Died. Not slowly, not heroically, not with any chance of retreat or negotiation. They died quickly and completely, their ships shattered and their crews vaporized before most of them even understood they were in a real fight. Krithos lived long enough to transmit a desperate plea for reinforcements before the Indomitable's plasma weapon erased his flagship from existence. The recordings of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. Every species that had dismissed humanity as weak and inexperienced watched in stunned silence as human warships demonstrated combat efficiency that exceeded most veteran military forces. The ships were new, but the tactics were refined through thousands of hours of simulation and study. Humans had spent decades watching other species fight. They had learned from every conflict, every mistake, every victory. And when they finally built their own fleet, they incorporated everything they had observed into weapons and strategies that reflected humanity's unique approach to warfare, ruthlessly efficient and uncompromising. The political fallout was immediate and dramatic. Within 24 hours of the battle, 12 species that had never spoken to human diplomats requested formal meetings. Within 48 hours, 3 species with territories near human space proposed mutual defense treaties. Within 72 hours, the Vren Collective formally requested mediation through the Assembly to prevent further conflict. Natasha received the Vren ambassador in the human embassy on the Assembly station. Thorvik's crystalline structure looked dimmer somehow, his light pattern subdued and careful. He had demanded the meeting, claiming diplomatic immunity and urgent need for negotiations. She made him wait for 2 hours in the lobby, a calculated insult that would have been unthinkable before. When she finally agreed to see him, she did not offer the traditional gestures of diplomatic courtesy. She simply sat behind her desk and waited for him to speak. Ambassador Volkov, Thorvik began, his voice lacking its previous arrogance. The recent battle was unfortunate. Clearly there were misunderstandings on both sides. The Vren Collective wishes to propose a ceasefire and formal negotiations to establish clear boundaries for our respective territories. Natasha leaned back in her chair and studied the Vren ambassador. A week ago, this being had laughed at humanity's weakness. Now he came begging for terms. The irony was not lost on her. "Let me be clear about something, Ambassador Thorvik," Natasha said. "Humanity is not interested in your ceasefires or your negotiations. You mistook our patience for weakness. You killed our people and called it accident. You tested us repeatedly, believing we would always turn the other cheek. You were wrong." Thorvik's light patterns flickered with what might have been fear. "Surely you do not want total war. The Vren Collective has resources that dwarf humanity's industrial capacity. A prolonged conflict would devastate both our species." "You are probably correct," Natasha agreed. "A long war would cost both sides terribly. Which is why the Vren Collective is going to accept humanity's terms without negotiation. You will withdraw from all territories within 50 light-years of human space. You will pay reparations for every human life you have taken, calculated at standard assembly compensation rates plus 300% damages. You will submit to assembly inspection of your military facilities to ensure compliance. And you will issue a formal apology, transmitted across all public channels, acknowledging your deliberate attacks on human colonies." "Impossible," Thorvik sputtered. "The Vren will never accept such humiliating terms. We are an ancient and proud species. We will fight before we surrender our honor." Natasha smiled, and it was the same terrible smile she had shown in the assembly chamber. "Then you will fight. And you will lose. Because while you were building your empire on intimidation and political manipulation, humanity was preparing for war. Real war. The kind of total conflict that our species perfected over thousands of years of killing each other. You think you understand violence. You do not. You have never seen what humans do when we stop pretending to be civilized." She stood and walked to the window overlooking the assembly station. "Do you know what our psychologists say, Ambassador? They say that every human carries within them the genetic memory of 10,000 years of warfare. Every human has ancestors who survived by being better at violence than their enemies. We tried to bury that part of ourselves when we reached the stars. We tried to be the peaceful explorers, the cooperative partners. You did not let us. So now you get to see what we really are when you strip away the civilization." Thorvik's crystalline structure pulsed with desperate light. "You would doom both our species for pride? How many must die before you are satisfied?" "None," Natasha said, turning back to face him. "Not one more person needs to die. Not human, not Vren, not anyone. All you have to do is accept our terms. Withdraw. Apologize. Pay what you owe. It is simple. Far simpler than what you put us through when you killed our people and made us beg for justice that never came." She walked back to her desk and sat down. "You have 24 hours to carry our terms to your government. If they reject them, the human fleet will begin systematic destruction of every Vren military installation in contested space. We will not target civilians. We will not burn your cities. But we will remove your ability to threaten anyone ever again. That is the choice. Pride or survival. Choose quickly. Thorvik left without another word. Natasha watched him go and felt the weight of thousands of lives pressing against her conscience. She had started something that could spiral into galaxy-wide war. She had gambled humanity's future on the assumption that the Vren would back down rather than face total military defeat. Thomas entered after Thorvik departed, his face troubled. Admiral Okonkwo wants to know if we are really prepared to carry out those threats. Destroying every Vren military installation would take months and cost thousands of lives on both sides. We will not have to, Natasha said, though her voice carried more hope than certainty. The Vren are bullies. Bullies fold when someone hits back hard enough. They have built their entire strategy on being feared. We took away their fear factor. Now they have to recalculate everything they thought they knew about power dynamics in this region of space. And if you are wrong? If they choose to fight? Natasha looked at him with eyes that had aged another decade in the past week. Then we fight. And we win. Because the alternative is returning to a galaxy where human lives do not matter, where we exist at the mercy of species that see us as disposable. I will not accept that world. Humanity will not accept it. We would rather burn the galaxy down than go back to being victims. The 24 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Intelligence reports showed Vren fleets mobilizing, but also showed internal political chaos within the collective. The battle at Sterling Deep had shocked them. The realization that humanity possessed military technology that matched or exceeded their own had shattered assumptions that had guided Vren policy for generations. When the response came, it was not from Thorvik but from the Vren High Council itself. They accepted every term. The withdrawal would begin immediately. Reparations would be paid over the next decade. Inspections would be allowed. The formal apology would be broadcast within the week. The message was terse and contained no diplomatic niceties, but it was complete capitulation. The Vren Collective, an empire that had dominated its region of space for 10,000 years, had been forced to bow to a species barely a century old. News of the Vren surrender spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The political implications were staggering. If humanity could force the Vren to terms, what did that mean for the balance of power in the Assembly? What did it mean for other aggressive species that had grown comfortable with impunity? What did it mean for the younger species that had looked at humanity's example and wondered if they too could stand up to their oppressors? The answers to those questions would take years to fully manifest, but the immediate result was clear. Humanity was no longer the weak newcomer to be pitted or exploited. They were a major power, and every species in the galaxy would have to adjust to that new reality. Natasha stood once more in the observation deck of the Horizon's Edge as the ship prepared to return to Earth. She had not slept properly in 9 days. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion and stress. But she had succeeded. Against impossible odds, with nothing but determination and the courage to risk everything, she had changed humanity's fate. Thomas joined her, and together they watched the stars in silence. Finally, the young officer spoke. What you did will be remembered for generations. You saved humanity from becoming permanent victims. You gave us the chance to be equals among the stars. I started a war, Natasha corrected quietly. A war we won this time, but wars have a way of spiraling beyond anyone's control. I convinced our leaders to gamble our entire future on a single aggressive move. If the Vren had not backed down, if they had called our bluff, thousands would have died. Maybe millions. That weight will never leave me. But they did back down, Thomas said. And no one died except those Vren who attacked Sterling Deep. You saved more lives than any battle could have cost. Natasha nodded slowly. Perhaps. Or perhaps I just taught the galaxy that violence is the only language that matters. That diplomacy and law and justice are illusions we tell ourselves while the strong do as they please and the weak suffer what they must. She turned to look at Thomas, and her expression was both proud and infinitely sad. We won today because we were willing to embrace the darkness within ourselves, the capacity for violence that civilization tries to suppress. But that darkness does not go away just because we won. It stays with us. And someday, some other species will look at humanity the way we looked at the Vren. They will see a powerful empire that uses its strength to impose its will. And they will wonder if anyone will stop us when we become the oppressors. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So we make sure that never happens. We remember what it felt like to be powerless. We remember the people who died while the assembly looked away. We use our power to protect others instead of victimizing them. We become the species that the assembly should have been, the protectors that we wished had existed when we needed help." Natasha smiled, and for the first time in days, it was a genuine expression of hope. Yes. That is exactly what we do. We remember. We become the galaxy we wished existed. And maybe, generations from now, some other young species will face their first crisis and humanity will be there to help instead of looking away. She placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. You will help build that future. Your generation will have to balance the power we gained with the responsibility it brings. You will have to be stronger and wiser than we were. You will have to prove that humanity can wield force without becoming monsters. We will, Thomas promised. We will honor what you built here. The horizon's edge jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving the assembly station behind. Ahead lay Earth, and a humanity forever changed by the knowledge that they had forced the galaxy to recognize their worth. Behind lay a political order shaken to its foundations, ancient species reconsidering assumptions they had held for millennia, and younger species finding the courage to demand the respect they deserved. In the grand spiral of the Milky Way, where 1,000 civilizations rose and fell like breathing, humanity had just announced their arrival not with words or pleas, but with undeniable force. They would never again be the children at the adult table. They would never again beg for protection that would not come. They had bought their place among the stars with courage and blood, and they would defend it with whatever it took. The assembly would rebuild its credibility, learning that justice delayed was justice denied, and that political convenience could no longer excuse moral cowardice. The Vren would spend generations recovering from the humiliation and recalculating their place in a galaxy where they were no longer untouchable. And humanity would carry forward both the pride of their victory and the terrible knowledge of what they were capable of when pushed to the edge. Above all, the galaxy had learned a lesson that echoed through every civilization: patience should never be mistaken for weakness, and peace should never be taken for granted. Those who forget these truths discover them again at great cost, written in the flames of burning worlds and the silence of voices never heard. The story of how humanity claimed their place among the stars was complete. But the story of what they would do with that place, and whether they would use their power to heal the galaxy's wounds or inflict new ones, was only beginning. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, other young species watched and wondered and prepared to write their own chapters in the never-ending story of survival, justice, and the eternal struggle between civilization and chaos. The galaxy awaited their decisions, knowing that each choice would ripple across space and time, shaping futures yet unwritten and destinies yet unfulfilled. The age of easy answers had ended. The age of consequence had begun. Retry.